Professor,
Yes.
I had a question about the conversions. So when we're showing our work on the chart, should we write down, like, should we print out a chart before the exam to show our and circle the conversions that we use? Or how would you recommend to go about that exactly?
I'm fine whether you want to print something out or you write something. I guess in the spirit of quote unquote showing work, it would be good if you wrote something.
Yeah,
Yeah. So if you write it before the exam, I'm kind of fine with that.
okay.
Then you can just circle we're talking about hex conversion, right? So
Yep,
yeah, so just kind of circle that and just explain why you pick those, and that should be fine.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're getting close to a good number of people to get started. I'm going to record this anyway, so it's fine. So where am I at here? So let me show you what I've kind of put out a few different things here. And for those of you that are coming from recitation, I hope they covered your TAs, and you guys let me know if that's not the case. I hope they covered some more stuff with the queries and the Venn diagrams. And the reason why I mentioned that is because I obviously know what's on the exam, right? So I see some of the Venn diagrams and the queries on there, which count for a decent number of the points there. And I know probably during my lectures I didn't cover like too many examples. I gave you a couple of examples with the queries and the Venn diagrams. So I thought it would be good for you to kind of get a few more examples to refer to. So I do hope that the TAs did that in the recitations just before this, because that's what I asked them to do. I don't have time to really go through that because I'm actually trying to cover chapters 18 and 19 today. So if the TAs have not done that, I'll try to see if I can work up some examples and post it to the announcements like I've been posting some of the other things. So yeah, just good. All right, good. So you have gone over it. So that's great. So yeah, I'm just telling you flat out, like there's a number of the Venn diagram stuffs on there. So do make sure you understand how that works, right? And really it's the basic things, right? So when you do the queries, you do the ands, you do the ors, and you do the nots. There's only 3 of those things, right? And then you just figure out based on those combinations, does it like fill in the whole circle? Does it fill in where the circles overlap? Or does it leave a blank spot where the circles overlap, right? Those are the most common combinations for the Venn diagrams. So just make sure you understand that, because I'm telling you it's on the exam, okay? So the other thing I put on the announcement also, so the way it's gonna work for the exam, and let me just go to my announcement. I put the announcement here for exam 1. I'm going to actually update this announcement and put the other TAs. So both TAs will actually be proctoring at 6:30 to 8 o'clock. Now, what happened in the past, they would use something called proctor track to kind of basically just like watch over to see all of you are taking the exam at that time and all that kind of stuff. I didn't really want to go into that level of complexity. So the only thing I'm going to do, because I know how many kids are in the class, how many students are in a class, just sign on to my WebEx and, of course, have your name on there. If your bandwidth allows, I know some people, they might have some trouble with their internet or whatever. If your bandwidth allows, post the video on so I can see that you're there, you're taking the exam and all that kind of stuff. Now, so that channel, my channel, would just be to kind of make sure whoever is supposed to be there to take the exam are the ones that are taking the exam, okay? And then if you have a question, so a question might be like, something about one of the questions that we asked, you don't understand the question, or for whatever reason, something happened, right? So we've had technical difficulties, right? If something happens where, you thought you uploaded it, it doesn't look like it uploaded or whatever, then reach out to one of the TAs. Both of them will have their sessions up and running. So Guan Yang actually runs with Zoom, and Simonica actually runs with WebEx. Either one of them will be available during the exam. You have to let them know right away so that we can get into the logs and figure out if there's like some sort of technical thing and see what we can do from that. Like if you tell us like way after the exam is over, there's not as much things we can do, right? So if you see a problem, you got to let us know right away. And so that's why we're gonna have both TAs available. I'm gonna update this, like I said, and you can see Simonica's WebEx on her lab, on her office hours, her lab hours. So do make sure you do that. I don't want to read all of this verbatim, but you can kind of see here. I hope you've kind of seen all of this, right? So, you know, we're basically going to run a 90-minute exam starting at 6:30, goes to 8 o'clock. It's all plugged into the computer. So, you know, as you might have noticed for your assignments, if you were trying to scramble in to submit it, like it really does cut off exactly at that time. So try not to wait until literally like 15 seconds before the end and then try to jam it in there. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to do the upload and the submission. So you want to be careful with that. Okay. The one thing that I am still trying to figure out to add is like the whole honor code statement at the end as the very last question. I might not be able to get that in there. So if I don't get that in there, you know, I might just have something where you just send me an email or something and, you know, saying that you've read the honor statement and like that. So like you see this, you're in honor, complete the exam without assistance, meaning no calculator, no Excel, no Googling around, all that kind of stuff, or online calculators or anything like that, right? So you're supposed to be using your text and resources available through you to Canvas. I've always encouraged everyone to kind of take notes and use those examples. I think most likely you've probably done that for like the numeric conversions, you know, some of the key facts or notes about like the different key people that we talked about. You know, things like, you know, digitizing pictures, digitizing videos, the sound, you know, what is it that you have to do to create lossless compression versus lossy compression? Those type of things, I assume you guys have taken notes and, you know, you're going to be able to refer to those things. Those are important, things like that. Yeah, don't ask someone else for help. You know, no tutoring service or anything like that, so on and so forth. Okay. These are important because this happens almost every time. Do not use the tab key, right? When you tab it, all of a sudden it goes to the next question and you can't go backwards. Okay, so you know, do follow these instructions. There's a reason why I made them bold and bigger. When you actually see the exam, you'll see they're really big. I made them super big because almost every exam we have someone that doesn't follow that direction and somehow, you know, they miss a couple questions or something like that. So do pay attention to this, okay? So that's that. And then what I did here, I updated. I know this is starting to get long here, but I know all of you would like to see all of this in kind of one area. And so all of the resources and all of that stuff is on here. So I've added on here for the week of the 21st, which is this week. You know, I put in some stuff for the assignment 2. The assignment 2 is going to cover flowchart and pseudocode. So it's going to, I put some examples here. Some of them are actually like a flowchart and pseudocode kind of like side by side. So I think those are pretty good examples. And you remember last week's lecture, I talked about the idea where you want those diamonds, those decision diamonds, to only have 2 output, like yes or no, true, false, or whatever. And what happens when you have like 3 choices or 4 choices or something like that. So I put that type of example in here. You're going to need to know how to do something similar. I've posted out the slides here. I have a JavaScript reference guide here. We have stuff for like, you know, you remember last time we were talking about valid variables and whatnot. And then down here, I have like a lot of these things broken down into particular topics. on videos. They're actually from the spring semester. So this might be good for you if you're kind of like, stuck on a particular area. You can kind of jump into these different things. I have a couple of HTML files that I'm going to work with in class. I'm going to at least upload some of it. Some of it, I encourage you to kind of write it yourself so you see what happens. So I noticed there was a few people for the last assignment that just went in there. A lot of people had some issues with, let's say, the local file on their computer and using the IMG tag. And, it was usually like a typo, right? Something kind of small. And, it's hard for me to tell, like some people came to me with screenshots and I was like going cross-eyed looking at those screenshots. So some of the stuff, like, it really does help you to like, type some of the stuff in instead of like just copy and pasting. So you realize that, some of these things you have to be very precise about, right? You have to close the quotes, you have to close the tags in some cases, depending which tag we're talking about. You have to be careful with spacing sometimes. Depends on which thing we're talking about, but the quotes and stuff like that, you miss a quote, all of a sudden the whole thing gets screwed up. So I will be posting up the samples, at least the headers or the skeletons there. And then some of the stuff I have to code within the PowerPoint slides. It just helps you to be able to type in that code yourself and try it out. Okay. I believe if you look on my announcement, I think I mentioned there was 28 questions on the exam. Okay. You're allowed to look at the class slides I've provided, so you can look at that. That's okay. Yeah. So is the video camera required? Unless you have a pretty good reason not to do it, I'm kind of recommending for everybody to kind of get that camera going. Look, I know this type of thing is not bulletproof for these type of things, what the intent is. So in some ways, I still have to trust all of you to be the ones that show up and do the exam. But I'm doing my best to at least show that we're doing something to monitor our students taking the exam. Okay. So do your best, but I understand sometimes, people might have some latency issues, not a great internet connection or whatever, then it is what it is, right? But, it's one of those things, like I talked about at the beginning of the semester, we have, academic integrity is pretty important here. If something comes up and you're identified either through our logs or through like our pattern matching versus like the internet, it's going to get submitted for review and it won't be in my hands anymore. So, do what you have to do, right? I'm doing my best to make sure we have some sort of governance around this whole thing to try to make sure that our students are doing the right thing. Okay. So yeah, try to do the camera thing. If you don't, just send me an email and just tell me, whatever is your situation and, we'll go with it. Okay. All right. I'm trying to be flexible here and understanding for, everyone's situation. I know, we all have our thing. All right. So just go ahead and let me know either way. But what I'm suggesting, I'm putting out there is that my WebEx will be used for everyone to sign on, show the video that they're there taking the exam. Okay. All right. Let me see here. All right, so that was here. Pay attention to any announcements that I'm posting up. I try not to post an announcement unless it's important. And the stuff I'm putting out there at this point is really to kind of get you as prepared for exam 1 as I can. All right, so that's why I posted these couple of things about assignment 1 tips or the exam that's coming up. Okay. All right. And I think I've said this before, but I do also put the stuff onto media gallery. Yeah, now this thing's taking for ages coming up. But yeah, so I have the summer stuff, should be all of them up here. I'm posting those up here. It's the reason why I mentioned this, if you may or may not have noticed, but sometimes I put these videos up on YouTube. And because they're long videos, they take a long time sometimes for YouTube to process them into high definition. right? So you only get like the default process, which is not high definition. And then that makes some of the slides or some of the screens not really that readable. But once I upload it to here, I think on the first shot, when I get it up there, it's already up to high definition. The YouTube ones, which is what I post in a link, sometimes there's a bit of a lag, sometimes even a couple of days before it becomes high definition. Okay. All right. So enough about this. If there's other questions that people are running into for studying for the exam, just send me an email and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. You know, the assignment, you know, you guys worked on it. It was due this past Sunday. We have another assignment that's opened up now. And I posted out those examples for the pseudocode and a flow chart. So hopefully this should be a good assignment for you to bang out pretty quickly. And let me go to chapter 18. So here we are. Okay. Let me see here. Okay. Yeah, so let's see if I have some time at the end, whether I can get to the Venn diagram. The reason why I asked the TAs to cover the Venn diagrams today is just because I knew I had to try to bang out chapter 18 and 19 in one day. So let's see where we get to. Okay, so, you know, one aspect of this is like debugging. And I covered a couple of different aspects of it. And, you know, debugging is one of those things that's it's sort of like a heuristic or a rule of thumb, right? It's very hard for you to kind of have like a computer or you follow some sort of algorithm that does debugging, right? You might be able to catch a lot of common, easy types of stuff, but there are some types of bugs, as you probably have seen when you were doing your HTML. It's not that easy to figure out, you know, the errors. So, you know, you got a lot of different challenges with debugging. So in some ways, debugging is like a little bit of an art sometimes, right? But here's like the three major types of bugs that you will see. Okay, so one is runtime. Okay, and that means like when you look at the code, like any type of syntax checking for that code, you know, whether it's the HTML or the JavaScript, but most likely, you know, you're not going to be able to see it. I flipped it here. So that's like only when you actually run it, you'll see like the error. Okay, and it's probably because like you see the code and then some data comes in and then that's what breaks the code, right? And you wouldn't see that error until the data came in and broke the code, right? But there's other times it's just like the way the language works that you're just not going to see the error until you're running the program or rendering, you know, on the browser, right? So that's what runtime error means. Now, compile time, you know, because this is not a computer science class, I'm not going to go into like, you know, all of the things about what compile means, but I'm just going to keep it short. When you compile something, you know, I can write some code and the program can kind of like translate that code on the fly, right? It'll see the instructions that I wrote down and convert them and render them, let's say the HTML or run the JavaScript on the fly or whatever. And that's fine, right? You might not get the error until like it actually runs. It might be a little bit slower because it's kind of running. And when you don't run something as compile, you're actually running as what they would call like interpreting, right? Don't have to write that down, right? But basically they're kind of like translating it on the fly versus when you do a compile, you're basically taking whatever you wrote and converting it to computer language, like right there and then, right? And what happens is like when you do that, you might get some errors. That's why they call them compile time errors. So you'll catch some stuff. There'll be some syntax checking, and then there'll be some stuff that can only just come out and you just say it's compile time errors, okay? And that's why they're saying they're identified before you run the program, right? So what happens when you compile your code? You do this before you run the program. This does a lot of different things, but one of the main things it does, it makes your program run faster because you've already pre-converted, you've already pre-translated the stuff into computer language. And then when the computer runs this, it will skip that step. It will just go right into running the program, versus like when you're running this and interpreting it, it's doing that translating work on the fly. So that has implications in terms of the type of errors that you might get. It has implications in terms of the performance that you might get from that program. Okay. Like I said, this goes into like a lot more different things, but because this is not a computer science class per se, I won't go into those nuances. Okay. But suffice to say, runtime error is when you're running the program, that's when you get an error. Compile time is basically before you run the program, you're just setting up the program to run later on. You'll get some errors like that, and that's called compile time errors. Okay. And, these are things that you can kind of catch programmatically. You can see it, like the computer just doesn't understand it, right? The runtime, sometimes it's like a combination of data that comes in plus your code to create an error, and that's why you don't see it until runtime. This is the most difficult one, the logic errors, right? So syntactically, it looks fine, right? But just the code doesn't behave the way you expect it to, right? And you're going to see a lot of this when you guys start getting into some of the JavaScript stuff. When we start doing some loops and arrays, you might forget that, an array starts off with a 0, right? You might think it starts off with a 1, right? You might forget like how to do your comparison for your for loop, and somehow you end up in an infinite loop and stuff like that. None of that is a syntax error, right? So all that type of stuff is what falls into a logic error, right? So syntactically, there's no way the computer is going to catch that. It might make a guess and say, hey, you probably didn't mean to do that, but it's not going to figure out, say, hey, this is 100% an error. And so that's why these are usually the hardest errors for you to catch, right? You can have logic errors that exist inside of programs for years and years and never get found until one day, someone punches in the right set of data that causes the whole thing to go berserk, right? So the logic errors is a challenging one, but these are the 3 types of errors that you have when it comes to debugging. Okay. So there's some other aspects with debugging, like I'll just call them general rules or heuristics, with your HTML, for example, right? And, for this past assignment, your HTML is fairly short, right? Most of you were able to get your HTML done in like about, one page, maybe 2 pages. And so there's a lot of things you look at in terms of trying to make it easier for you to debug. And I think some of you pointed out when we first started looking at HTML, people were asking like about the tabbing and indenting and lining things up, right? That's not for the computer, it's for you, right? So when you have an error, if you can't really read the code, you can't really follow the code easily and understand what's going on, that's going to cause you a big problem for debugging, okay? And then, so one important part for debugging is organize your code well, right? There's a lot of like strategies on how do you organize your code, like, setting up your variable definitions in one place, setting up your function declarations in one place, right? Giving your variables good names, right? We had like in like the last class, we were talking about what are good variable names. So don't call a variable ABC, right? Give a variable name that kind of describes what it's doing. So when you're looking at the code, you might be able to say, oh, this thing is talking about the length of, this object, and this other variable is talking about, the width of this object, let's say. So give your variables good names as another good practice. That helps you when you want to do debugging. The other thing that you might do, and I kind of pointed this out in terms of like comments, right? So part of the thing is you do comments to like give descriptions about what you're doing in the code, but the other part of comments is to help you to isolate things. Right now, there's like a lot of debuggers right now that will actually step you through the code. So one line by line, it walks you through the code. And sometimes you can catch the error that way. But sometimes you can't, because like I said, you have a logic error. You might not know what's going on, right? And you might need to print the variables out each step of the way. You might be assuming that you assigned a value to the variable, and then that's the value when you get to the end of the program. And because you have a bug, you don't realize that that value has changed. So you might have to do some printing of the variables. Sometimes the debuggers help you with that. They can kind of display all of the values in your variables as you go. So there's 2 aspects to that. One, you might use your comments to comment out large sections of the code to help you to isolate where the error might be. Otherwise, you might be looking at like a 20-page program and you have no idea where the error might be, right? So you might comment out large section of the code and they say, is this working? If it's not working, then you've kind of narrowed down the code, right? So instead of looking at 20 pages, maybe you're only looking at the first 4 pages, let's say. So you can use comments in the right way to isolate your code and try to narrow down where the error might be. Okay, so these are kind of like general debugging type of strategies. In the book, when you read the textbook, and while I'm here, just let me remind you, I think most of you kind of know this because I talked about this before, is, don't forget, there's 3 aspects to this course. One is the recitations, one is the lectures, and one is the reading. Okay, so do be mindful. There is stuff in here that you should be looking at in the book, right? So look at those things. And I believe in the book, there's a chapter actually on debugging. So you should make sure to look at that. And I think a lot of the strategy that I just mentioned should overlap with what is mentioned in the book. Keep that in mind, because when you actually get into the next section of the class, which is programming in JavaScript, you're going to need to get familiar with how to debug things. Otherwise, you're going to be staring at a screen for a very long time, not knowing where your bug is. So debugging is important, especially when you get into larger programs. Okay, so be mindful of those things that I mentioned in terms of some general strategies on how you organize your code and the strategies on how to do the debugging. Okay. All right, so here, this is like the general like skeleton I was mentioning, right? So we talked about, this is stuff, from HTML, and then here in the head section, we have this here, and this just basically says like, your background color, and, you have your font. We have some text alignment and whatnot, and then we have large font size, right? So I've actually, this, not a big deal whether you type this or not. So I kind of saved a copy of this here in my resources. 621 right here. Chat variables. Chapter 18, HTML without header. Okay, so I have that here. Actually, after this class, I might take this and paste this up to here so you can see it up here. So you can use this as your starter, so you don't have to type that whole skeleton by yourself. I mean, it's not a big deal one way or the other, I guess, but that's one of the things there. And then I actually have this up here. So all this other code part is also in the PowerPoint that I'm referring to here. Okay. And that I'm going to ask you, hopefully you don't find it like too much HTML, but I'm asking you to try and put that in yourself. Okay. So I'm going to give you this, right? You can start with this. This is basically, I call it the skeleton, starts off with here. And then here. So this is your first look at JavaScript. Okay. So these things right here, these are called text boxes, right? And so we're going to be working on some stuff here. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to do something where you can put your name here. And then once you're done, right? When we say done, means like kind of get out of this box. While you're in this box, you're typing in something that is being active, right? That text box is active, right? And then when you leave that text box, that from a computer perspective, from a programming language perspective, is an event, right? So what happens is your computer is looking for all kinds of events, right? So it looks at your browser, looks at their screen, and when you do certain things, you click on the button, you push the button in, or you push the button off, or you're typing, or you make a box active or inactive. Each of those things the computer recognizes as an event, right? So the computer has these things that are listening for these events, and then you can attach code to use those events to do something. So in this case, when I type in a name here and I leave, that generates an event, and based on that event, I'm going to take that name and stick it over here, okay? And so that's what this box is doing here, and I'm gonna kind of demonstrate that in a second here. So you recognize this, here's your body of your HTML, okay? And just keep in mind here, there's this stuff here within the quote, this is the JavaScript. So when people say, what is the JavaScript and what is the HTML? All of this stuff up here, this is your HTML, right? So these tags and stuff like that, right? All of the stuff within the quote here, when it says on change is an event, okay? So when I type this in, like I was saying, as you're typing it, it's changing, right? So the on change, you're going to do this, right? So within this quote, I'm going to say, here's my text box, right? And the value of the text box is equal to, and this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of like these things that does accumulating, right? So in this case, this is a variable that is accumulating a string, right? So in this case, I have the text box hello.value, and it's equal to, well, the text box hello.value plus whatever I typed up here, right? So this box is called text box hello, and it already starts off with hello inside of it. So that's why you're saying, take whatever is already inside of it plus this box, which is your text box.name, and says hello, blah, 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 whatever you typed in there, right? So this right here is your JavaScript, okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you. And this is just setting the value here, right? And this is important here to set it to be read-only, right? So when you create, like, let's say in this case, there's only 2 text boxes. When you kind of make this like not read-only, you can make it typing in here. There's all kinds of situations that kind of makes the code more complicated for you to try to enforce, things that make sense here. So it just kind of makes it easier. It takes like one layer of confusion or point of failure, whatever. It takes it out of the equation by making this read-only, right? So this part is read-only, like right here, okay? And you have your input style here. So basically here, you're just saying, okay, that's my font size. This is standard. So you're just saying that this is text. The ID, that's the name, right? You can call this like the variable, or you can call this the name of the text box, right? Right. So text box name. And then the value you want it to start off as blank. Okay. And then the size is 20. And then, like I said, this is an important part, the on change event. And that's where you put in your JavaScript. And this JavaScript is taking this name and appending it to this name, to this value. Okay. All right. So let's see what that looks like. Let me see here. I'm up here. So I kind of jammed in a whole bunch of the stuff going down here. But here's the part that we have. Okay. And let's see what that looks like when I go up to here. Okay, so you'll see based on the skeleton, you can see the background color is this Dodger blue. Okay, and then this part up here is the code that we've just been looking at. So let's do this. So I'm going to type A, D, and then I'm just going to click out of it. Right. So by me clicking out of it, that basically takes me out of this text box. So whatever I was typing in here, that's what fires this on change event. Right. And then when that on change event happens, it will take this hello and that plus sign I did, which is basically to append, and then this value in this box over to here. And that's how come you have hello Arnold. Okay. So that's what all of this is happening here. Okay, so this is the first part of JavaScript. Above like the fact that last week we talked about naming variables in JavaScript. So this is like one of the first things that you can look at and do. It's basically taking some value as input and then adding it to something else, right? And these are the type of things that you would do with some sort of programming language. HTML is not going to do this. HTML is basically just going to take whatever text that you want to print out and then kind of say, like, is it bold? Is it big? Like whatever font size and stuff like that. So HTML is only about how do you render something? How does something look? Versus JavaScript is actually manipulating data, right? It's taking input data either from the screen or from something else and then doing something with it, right? In this case, it's taking the input of my name and then appending it to hello and displaying it, okay? So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. All right, so the next important concept here is the button, okay? So this is one of those things you want to take notes on this and make sure you're able to do this because this is an important thing for JavaScript is the idea of a button. The ID, which is kind of same thing of saying like your name, your variable. This kind of goes against our suggestion as to making this a meaningful name, but that's what it is, right? So it's button1, right? That's the name here. And then the value is click me, right? You can see click me down here. And then so when you say on click, this is like an alert box, right? So it will pop up, which I'm going to show you in a second, and it'll say hello world. Okay. Now notice this couple of things here, right? So when I put the double quotes here, this is to say like, you know, that's where my JavaScript is for this event of on click when I click this button. So if I was just doing the alert box without all of this here, it probably wouldn't matter whether I use a single quote or a double quote. But because I have this here like this, the recommendation I would have is to use the single quotes in here, because if I start putting a double quote in here, this on click is going to get confused. Okay, so in this particular example, do the double quote here and then do the single quote like this to kind of keep things from getting confused, right? And this is a very common case, right? And so that's why I kind of remind people to do that, because a lot of times people mix up things. It's very common to mix up your parentheses, right? Maybe you have a couple of different parentheses and your mismatch on your parentheses. Sometimes that's where these editors help you because they tell you which parentheses match off to which ones. Same thing for the quotes, okay? But if I put a double quote in here, it's going to confuse the computer. So you don't want to mess around with that. So if I have the double quote out here, then you can do the single quote in here and save yourself a lot of trouble. Okay. You could actually do it the other way around too. You can do single quote out here and double quote in here. Okay. It works both ways. Okay. So let me come back to here. Oh, here's the click me. And so this is what I mean by the alert box up here. So it says this page says hello world. And that's your alert box. Usually in my experience, when I use the alert box, I use it more for debugging, right? Or something quick and dirty, right? So sometimes when you guys are working on your assignment or something, you might have like a whole bunch of questions that you're asking, and then you just want to kind of put in some debugs or whatever. I might just use the alert. And then that will pop up these alert boxes, right? So that's when I tend to use alert boxes. If it's really like a formal application where I'm trying to get people to, you know, look at their input in a nice kind of pretty way or whatever, then I'm going to render it within the HTML versus like using the alert box, right? So maybe I'll put into like these text boxes, or, you know, I'll print it out or set it up directly within HTML, like regenerate the HTML view or open it up in another page or whatever, versus like popping up alert boxes. Because really, if you ask a whole bunch of questions and you're popping up a whole bunch of alert boxes, people get annoyed. They don't like to click on a whole bunch of like boxes popping up at them, right? So the alert boxes, I think for me personally, it's more for like your own debugging. So you want to put in something to kind of say, oh, I'm here, I clicked on this button, and like these are the variables and what the values are inside those variables, something like that, right? So I tend to use alert boxes more for debugging. But we've used it for writing simple applications to pop up answers and stuff like that. So you can use like the alert box for that, right? But so that's what the alert looks like, right? So if I did this again, like that, okay? So that's your alert here, okay? Let me see here. So are the quotations mandatory? Yes. Like here, the on click, yeah, that's definitely mandatory. If you don't put that in there, like, yeah, all kinds of bad things are going to happen, right? So like this for sure. Like there's other stuff within HTML, you can kind of get away with it, and you won't break it. You might just get some unexpected results from time to time. These quotes are mandatory, right? And then when I do the alert, this is mandatory, right? So I'm putting like, I'm basically passing it in like the string here. The other way you could do this, you can pass a variable in here, right? So you can have like variable ABC, you pass that in there, then you wouldn't need the quote, right? But if you're kind of literally telling the alert box what to print out, then you're going to have to use a quote, okay? So in that respect, the quotes are mandatory. Okay. All right, so radio buttons. This is a interesting little area here. So this is pretty important. This is going to be for your assignment. So you should definitely know how to use the radio buttons. And this is also, it covers a significant part of your exam too also. So pay attention on these radio buttons here, okay? So the radio buttons are these things right here, right? And what it is that it's treated as like a set, right? So apples, bananas, and peaches, it's almost like one grouping of stuff, right? And that's why you see this thing highlighted in red here, right? Normally you looked at these other things up here, they all have different names and stuff like that on there, right? So there's two things on here to pay attention to. Number one, you see the ID here, right? So ID, A, B, and C, again, probably not a great choice of variable names, but okay, fine, right? So A, B, and C, but then this is important. Again, that's why we made it red, right? Do not forget this, otherwise it's not going to behave the way you're supposed to behave, okay? So by naming it like this, that means I can only select one of these things, right? So if I select apples, then like the peaches will unclick. If I select bananas and then this was clicked, then it will unclick that. So the idea with the real buttons, you can only choose one thing, right? You can only choose yes or no, true, false, or in this case, you can only pick peaches, right? And then, based off of that, then we print it out. Now, remember, it's very similar to this, right? So we had this one set up as read-only, right? The bottom one, you see the read-only here. Same thing. So we're using the text box for display. Is that very common? Probably not. Like if you actually were doing this, you probably would not be doing it this way. But for the purpose of this class, this seems like the most easiest way to kind of display these things as your output. So yeah, you can see read only, right? Same thing as what I mentioned before, text, right? Again, a poor variable name, but okay, box one, and then we set the value to be blank, right? This is what we would call initialize, right? I initialized the variable to be blank, okay? Or the value to be blank, I should say. Once I clicked on this, then you can see up here, you can see box one dot value sticks it here, okay? So again, when I talk about event-driven program, this is the click, on click. So when I click on apples, let's say, then it would go and say, oh, so box one dot value equals to value, right? In this case, it's apples, right? See apples here, okay? Same thing here. If I clicked on this one, box one, which is this, box one dot value equals to value, and that's the value here, right? And how does the computer understand which one is which one, right? A computer understands which one is which one because of this box one, right? So if I say box one dot value, it tells me it has to be this thing, box one dot value, okay? By me saying value like this, I guess you can say out of context or whatever, it'll just say, you must mean this one value, right? So do pay attention. Very often people make mistakes here, right? They say, oh, value. Well, which value are you talking about, right? So if you're not careful with this and making sure that you're specific about which one you're talking about, it's very easy to mix these values together, okay? So again, important to note, on click, that's your event, here's your JavaScript, and what it's doing is saying, here's my little box to display the output, and I'm taking these values and putting them in there, okay? Important concept for the radio buttons, make it the same name, otherwise your radio button is not gonna work properly. And so you keep on, adding more to these. Let's say you wanted to add, I don't know, whatever, what other type of fruits are there? Some other type of fruit, which I'm drawing a blank on right now. So you can add that, and then you just have to make sure the name equals the fruit, and then you'll have another option here. Okay, and then it will display here. So let me go back to here, and I have it right here, right? So I have this down here. That's the text box, that's the button. So this is the radio button. And I'm just gonna click here so you can kind of see, like at least on my notepad, I know some of you are using Atom and using like Visual Studio, but similar type of idea where you click on different things and it tries to give you some hints as to, like, in this case, you're talking about your tag. Make sure you don't make silly mistakes as much as it can. It tries to be helpful in that regard. Okay, so in this case, you see I clicked on value and it just highlighted all the different places that has value here. Okay, so I clicked on apple. Oops, I still had that up. So I click on apple, became apples, bananas, and peaches. Okay, and that's all driven by this on click event. When I click on something, it's going to follow whatever code I put into this double quotes here, right? And like I said, pay attention to this box one, like that, like that. Pay attention to that so you can use the right value here, okay? All right, let me see here. Chapter 18. All right. All right. So now, you've got the basic working components, right? You've got the text box, you've got a button, right? You got another text box here, right? So in this case, we're going to talk about, if I get like the temperature in Fahrenheit, how can I calculate an answer for you in Celsius? So I'm doing a Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion. Okay. And so this is the same thing, right? You got the on click here, and now you start getting into variables, right? And initializing them and whatnot. Okay, so here's what this is doing. This is all JavaScript right now. Okay, number one, I have a variable, and not really consistent with my naming convention for variables, but so normally I think this should be a lowercase f with a capital at best, and then maybe a capital D, EGREES. Okay, so starting off with the first letter of your variable as a lowercase. Okay, but like I said, these are conventions, so you don't have to follow it. You can do your own thing if you want, right? And if you're wondering from the exam standpoint, we're not necessarily going to take away points from you if you kind of name your variables in sort of different ways. You know what best practice is. If you don't follow it, that's your thing, and that's fine. Okay. So F degrees, and you say, this part is number. This is a important concept here. So let me come back to that in a second. And then this is fbox dot value. Okay. We'll close this. So this is the F box, right? Box. So the F box is basically the top one. This one right here, that's the text box. Okay, so you declared the variable. So the act of putting in the var and F degrees, that's your act of declaring the variable. By doing this equals, and then you say this number F box, you're initializing the variable, right? So just to remind people, I think I covered this last class too. That's, you know, basically the two important concepts here: declaring a variable, initializing the variable. Okay, so you declare the variable, initialize the variable. Now let me talk about what this number means. Okay, so right now I can put in whatever I want to put in here. I could put in ABC. In this case, I put in 71, but the computer doesn't really know, right? It's not really sure. How do I know I'm talking about the number, you know, whatever, 1, 2, 3, or I'm talking about characters 1, 2, 3, right? The computer doesn't really know, right? But the thing is, you have these different types of calculations. Like I'm doing like minus 32. I'm doing times 5 divided by 9. You know, it expects things to be a number, right? So the computer will get all kinds of screwed up if you mix things up between strings and numbers, okay? And so what does this number do? It basically tells the computer to expect a number. This is going to be a number. So if I put in 1, 2, 3, this is going to tell you that it's a number, right? And that's what it assigns to F degrees. So F degrees will get a number from here. If I don't put this number here, I just show F box, I can put in, it could be a string, the computer doesn't know. And that's when I put into here. And then when I do some other calculations, the computer may or may not work properly because it might get confused as to whether it's working with a string or not. So when you know for sure you're going to be working with this thing as a number, then you put it, this is called a function, right? This function casts or sets, it tells the computer that this is a number, right? And then you can do like mathematical type of stuff on it. Okay. And so this has taken this value and assigned it to F degrees. Okay. That's the initialization part. Now I'm going to go to here and I'm going to say, well, this is your standard conversion from Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? So I'm taking the Fahrenheit temperature, F degrees, minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. And then I'm taking the answer for that and sticking it into C degrees, Celsius degrees. Now, there's another thing to notice here. Once I've decided that something is a number, then I get something like this. Then I can put in like this dot, and I can put in 2 fixed, and then I can put in parentheses 2, okay? So I know I told some people I was gonna put in some polls, and I guess I should have put some polls in here, but I was kind of, you know, trying to set this up here, so I didn't get a chance to put a poll in here. But so I'll ask you a question, but I'll just answer it for you, right? So what do you think this does? And so what this does is really to say, I'm gonna go out 2 decimal places on this number. So this is a number, and because this is a number, C degrees is a number, I get this little special function called 2 fixed. And what this does is say, I'm going to go out 2 decimal places with this. I take the answer to this, and I'm going to display it in cbox.value. And look, same thing as all the other examples. cbox.value is a text box, which is read only. Okay, so you can see this is like the pattern, right? So this is the pattern here, right? So using a text box to display stuff. So let's go with, let's go 32 degrees Fahrenheit, calculate Celsius at 0. And look at this, you can see the dot, well, maybe you don't see it. So let me zoom it up a little bit. So you can see 32, calculate Celsius, and I get 0 here. Okay. So that's basically a Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion there. Let me do another one. Let's do 89. So hopefully this should be apparent to you. We're going 2 decimal places with that. So that's what 2 fixed is, right? But like I was saying before, all of this stuff with these number calculations, they all go haywire if you don't tell the computer this is a number, right? So it's very common for people just to kind of, put this in here and say, okay, I have a value in here, go do some calculations. And then the computer comes back with like NaN, right? So not a number, right? And you're saying, wait, that looks like a number to me, right? The computer doesn't know, right? And so for the computer to know, you have to do that. Once you tell the variable that you're working with a number, then you get access to things like this, right? 2 fixed. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So I look at dot value as basically the value of whatever it is, right? So in this case, let's say we're talking about the text box here. So dot value would be the value that this object has. So this object, this text box object, the value of it is 71. In this case, the text box dot value is 21.67. Okay, so it's just referencing what does that object hold. Okay, just like here, right? So this is a radio button, right? But what's associated with each one of these, right, is these values, right? So this one is apples. So you want to say this is apples, bananas, and so on and so forth, right? And so when I pick this, how do I know what I picked? I picked something, right? And that something is apples. So that's how I know when I click on this, this is the event. This is how I know that I actually picked value of apples, and then assigns this apples to this value. And this how this box became, in this example, peaches. Okay. Actually, this picture is a little bit inaccurate, right? You can see the peaches are in all caps here, but then you can see the value here is lowercase, all peaches, right? So a little bit of a bug here, right? But the idea really is still the same, value and value. Okay, this is the value here for this box. This is the value for this one here. Okay, like so. All right. So I want to give you like a little bit of class homework, or our class attendance thing here. So really, if you can take what I just did here and just add on to it a little bit by being able to click on these radio buttons. You see these radio buttons here, Fahrenheit to Celsius and Celsius to Fahrenheit. You see here, I only did one thing. I only calculate from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So what you can do, so all this is still the same. So this up here is the same. This is the same here, right? But you can say, calculate Fahrenheit to Celsius, Celsius to Fahrenheit, and something will happen. Okay. Now, I think to make things easier for you, right? Because you remember how we were doing things like read-only and whatever, right? I think the easiest thing to kind of make this more general is don't worry about whether you're putting in a Fahrenheit or Celsius up here. And, the fact is this will always be opposite of whatever you put in here. So if you put in a Fahrenheit, then you'll know this is Celsius. If you put in Celsius, this will be Fahrenheit. That way, you only have to focus on these radio buttons to having like a certain set of logic. If you don't do that, if you kind of have to figure out, oh, okay, I have to flip things around. That's just like an extra bit of logic that I think for classwork, I don't think I need you guys to do that. So don't worry about like saying that this is Fahrenheit and then this is Celsius. Just say, I'm going to put in a number here, and based on whatever number I put in here, I'm going to either convert it from a Fahrenheit to Celsius or Celsius to Fahrenheit. So hopefully that makes the assignment, the in-class assignment fairly easy for you. But even having said that, I'm not going to really take that much of a break because we don't have that much time today. So I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. Do whatever you can and really base it off of this. Okay. And try to program the radio buttons like this, using this, and come back with something. You don't have to turn it into this like right now, maybe after class later on tonight, you can send me an email with this. You can send it to me in an HTML file using a skeleton and just kind of rendering this. Okay, you remember I showed you where the HTML skeleton is, which is up on my resources page. Okay, so it's 7:01. Let's come back at 7:06. Do what you can right now. If you don't finish it, don't worry. And just submit it like tonight sometime. Okay. All right. So you have 5 minutes. I'll see you back in here 5 minutes. Hello. Okay. So showing what the code in the HTML file look like. Let me come back to here. I think for the purpose of this, let me just shorten this up a little bit. And keep it at that. Okay. Okay, so this you might recognize, this is the skeleton right up here. And this is the body. Okay, so when you start off with the skeleton, which is what I provided in the resources up here. HTML with header, right? Chapter 18, HTML with header. That's what this is up here, right? So I'm saving you the trouble of typing this in. This is the stuff that I have in my PowerPoint here. Right, so you can just type that in there. I mean, if you're just doing this for practice, you don't even have to type in 3 of them, just type in 2 like this, or just use my in-class assignment of setting this up, and that should be fine as your example. Okay, so this is what you start off with. Then this is the stuff that we got from the PowerPoint. You put this in the body here, the body tags here, and then you put in your code on the on-click events. Okay. So for this exercise here, like I said, I'm freeing you up from having to say, always put Fahrenheit here and Celsius here. I'm just kind of letting you just put in whatever into your text box 1. You can keep the bottom one as read only. Don't have to do anything there. And then you can set up one radio button to do this calculation, and then another radio button to do the Celsius to Fahrenheit calculation, right? So you have a Fahrenheit to Celsius calculation, Fahrenheit to Celsius, Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? So you already have the Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? That's all of this stuff here. On click, that's what this is, okay? So all you have to do is, instead of saying apples here, you can put in like Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? And then you see this on click here, do your calculation in here, which is this. Okay. And then you would use like your second radio button, and you would do the opposite of this, right? So instead of going from Fahrenheit to Celsius, you're going to go from Celsius to Fahrenheit. You just flip this around. Okay. So so that's what we're going to try and do. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to chapter 19. If you guys get stuck with this, just like send me an email, okay, with your HTML file, and tell me where you're stuck at, what question you have, and I'll do my best to try to look at it quickly and come back to you with the response on that. Right. So hopefully between you and me, we can work out something where you have some good hands-on coding examples that you can use as a basis for you to prepare for your assignment, your upcoming assignment, as well as like for studying for exam 2. And in case if you haven't looked at the student calendar, the schedule, you would notice that the second exam is coming up in a couple of weeks. So it's gonna be on us fairly quickly. So like I said at the beginning of class, we're moving at a fairly fast pace here. Okay. So like I said, have a go at this. And if you get stuck somewhere, just send me an email. And then with the HTML file, and I'll do with the question, right? Don't just send me an HTML file and say, okay, I don't know what to do. You can send me HTML file with wherever you might be stuck at, and I'll do my best to kind of answer in a way that you can learn something and use that as a basis for preparing for exam 2 or for your assignment that's upcoming. Okay. All right. Let's go to chapter 19. All right, where's chapter 19 here? Here's chapter 19. I'll close out chapter 8. No, I'll leave chapter 18 here. Okay. All right. So now we have, it's almost like a combination. It's pulling all of these things together. So you recognize this, right? So we're running a gas station, okay? So in this gas station, you can choose between 3 different types of gas, right? And here's the prices for each of them. And then here's your radio buttons, okay? And so based on me clicking on one of these, I'm gonna display what value of the price per gallon is into here. And then I'm gonna have an input here and say, well, how many gallons of gas do you want? Maybe I want 10 gallons or whatever, right? So I put in that. And then the other thing would be a preferred customer, okay? Are you a preferred customer or not? And then based on all of this, then you're gonna calculate what is your total cost for this gas, okay? So the reason why we use this as an example, it actually ticks off a lot of boxes, right? You have a button here, you have radio buttons here, you have text boxes here, and you're basically like taking inputs into this text box here, you're doing some sort of calculation and out comes something here, right? And a very common issue, like I said before, is like this idea of understanding whether something is a string or a number. So it's very important that you're actually able to set all of these to be numbers and then come up with a good calculation here. Most often, a lot of people, they don't do that and they end up with a total cost of NaN, right? So if you do this stuff with JavaScript enough, you'll see a lot of NaNs, which is not a number, right? So you need to make sure you specify these as numbers, and then your calculations should work as you would expect, okay? So here's another one. I actually set up the code here. And I basically reused the skeleton from before. So with the whole midnight blue and all like that, okay? Oh, this one's different. This is to calculate your pay. And then we have the heads or tails here. So let me go back to here. So this one is basically setting the background color. So this is the head, right? You can see the head up here. You can see the background color to be this bisque color. And then the fonts, you have your alignment to center. So the stuff should all be in the center, your font size, what your button should look like, and your input here. Okay, so doing this, like I was saying before, when we look at the CSS, you're setting up your style at the top so that everything else at the bottom in the body will just use this. You don't have to type this in line all the time. So when I get to saying P, it would always use this all the time. Okay, or if I use a button, it will use this all the time. So I don't do this over and over again. Okay. 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 So yeah, so when you open up that HTML with the header, that's exactly what you should expect, right? You should only expect like a blue page. That's only like a skeleton, right? You have to put the code into the body for that, okay? So here's the first thing that we would look at, okay? So in the body, right? Like I was saying before, you want to declare some variables, right? So ideally, we try to declare these type of variables in one place, right? You could put the variables all over the place and the JavaScript will work, but doing this will kind of help you to organize your code and keep things organized in case you need to debug it, okay? So here, you're doing the variables, right? You're declaring them, price per gallon, right? And you notice the convention, lowercase for the first letter, camelback, right, per gallon. And then you're doing the initialization. You're setting it equals to 0. I think someone asked me, can we have spaces here? Yes, you can, right? So you put spaces here. You have the semicolon here. And here's a, preferred customer. equals to no. And actually, I think this is not correct, right? Having your quote like this here, okay? So it should just be this and semicolon and you're done, okay? So I'm not really sure why we have this little single quote action here, right? So it should be var prefer customers equals to no, and this is a string of no, right? Okay, so this is the heading. Remember this from your HTML, right? So H1, and it puts it up right here in the center, right? And why is it in the center? Because I don't see a center here, right? The reason why it's in the center is because over here, I'm saying everything should be centered, right? So this is kind of a rehash of what you learned already for HTML. So by having the style set up in the header, I only have to put in this H1 gas station time. It automatically knows to set this to be center here. Okay. So what type of gas do you want? That's right up here, right? So that's a new paragraph with a new P here. This tells you the font size is 20. Okay. And where am I at here? Here. So setting up to 20, what's the gas type that you want? Now we're going to have the radio. Okay. So you're going to have the type is a radio, and ID is R. I guess R is for regular. And then you have gas type for your name here. And then when you have on click, you're setting that variable. This is the variable price per gallon. You're setting the price per gallon equals to 250. Okay. And per gal price dot value equals to price per gal to fixed for 2 decimal places. Okay. So something like this, you can kind of say, yeah, it's pretty apparent that the computer knows this is a number, right? Because you didn't like put some quotes around it. Like if this was like put some quotes around it, you're actually telling this is a string. Okay. So you can kind of say, yeah, by me putting like 250 like this, it knows that this is a number. Okay. But sometimes what I like to do, like even though that it seems very apparent that something is a number or a string, I'll put the number function around it anyway, just to make double sure, and almost like, you know, shout it out to other people looking at the code that it's a number. Okay. But like I said, you don't have to. You can do it exactly like this by saying it's 250. And yeah, it knows that it's a number. So that's why you can do the 2 fixed for 2 decimal places here. Okay. And then per gal price dot value, which is this box right here, is equal to, in this case, 250. Okay. So that's how it kind of cascades down. Now that's one way you could have done that. The other way you could have done that is instead of doing this and this and this and have this other variable like this, you could have just said 250 and then stuck it right into per gal price dot value. Okay, you already set it up as like a number over here, right? The only thing you really get out of this is being able to say it's like 2 decimal places like that, right? So you set the variable as a number type, and then based on that, you can use this 2 fixed function to make it 2 decimal places. If you just stuck this 2.5 into here, what's going to just show up here is going to be 2.5, not 2.50. Okay, so that's this first radio button here. And really, it doesn't show the other 2 radio buttons because they're all along the lines of this. It's very similar. And you're just going to put in like whatever value, like $2.75 and $3 for those. But this should give you the idea, right? So that's why we would have finishing the code with the gas price radio buttons, right? You can choose to do this on your own. But as far as like the in-class homework, I'm fine if you just do that Celsius and Fahrenheit conversion. Okay, but this is like the point in the class where we would ask people to maybe code this on your own, and you can if you want. It's really basically, if you had this, you would just basically copy and paste this down 2 more times, and then just change these values to be $2.75 and $3. And maybe I guess you would change the ID to be a P and a S, let's say. Okay, but everything else will be the same. Okay, so I hope everybody can follow that. If you have any questions on that, like let me know after class. Let me see if I can do very quickly here, like this, what I was just saying. If I just set this value to something here. All right, so what I'm going to do just to kind of show what I meant by this is, I know I do a cbox.value equals to this to fix too, but I'm going to just like put in my own value here. So I'm going to put in cbox.value equals to 2.50 here. Okay, and let me go back to here. And I'm going to go 32. All right. So it doesn't matter. I did a calculation here. I overrode it by putting in my thing at the end of that code there. But you see what happened, which is what I was trying to make my point on the other point, is it became 2.50. Right. So it doesn't matter that I said cbox.value equals to 2.50. It put it in as 2.5. That's why I need the 2 fixed value to make sure it's 2 decimal places. Okay, so I could have done something kind of bogus. I could have just stuck this in quotes here and treat it as a string. But again, you're going to create yourself all kinds of problems if I actually want to do a calculation with this later on, right? So that's not a good idea. So don't do that. All right, so you want to treat it as a number. So that's how you stuff it into a variable, and then use that toFixed function to declare how many decimal places you want to go. Okay, so hopefully people can see that, and that was clear here. Okay, so like I said, you want to do this, just copy and paste this down for 2 more, and just change the ID and then change the price, and you'll get that. Okay, your price per gallon will be one of these choices here. Okay, so that's the radio button side of things. Okay, and this is just a straight text box here. So how many gallons do you want, right? Now, this is definitely where you want to say this is a number. So whatever value you get in here, I forgot, I see something here that says what we called it. No, but so let's say we would call this like text.gallons or something, right? Then you want to put like the number around it to make sure that it has to be a number. Okay, so then you can do whatever math functions on it. Okay, so then you come down here to preferred customer. Okay, and so this one is 2 things. It's either yes or it's no. Okay. And just for your HTML part, notice here, right? So you have your space here by using this ampersand NBSP. Okay, so that's to put a space there. So you have your radio button, right? ID is Y for yes. And then this is for preferred, right? And if you want to create the next one, it would be the same thing with the same name, preferred, but the ID would be N for no, right? And you would put in some code here. I know it says finish coding for preferred customer buttons. I'm kind of just telling you what you have to do here. So on click, you would say that this is a preferred customer, right? Remember up here when we declared the variables, we declared the preferred customer defaulted to be no, right? We initialized it to be no, okay? And here, you would basically say yes. right? I'm a preferred customer, right? So you would set it to be yes. And then you could, because you notice up top, I already initialized to be no. You could just say, I'm not going to do anything because I've already set it to be no. But you might say, well, I might be like doing this over and over again. I might be putting multiple things in there. And you don't want to just count on like something to be defaulted to be that. So again, to help with your debugging, you want to make these things more explicit. So you would copy and paste this, put the no here, and you would set this to be n, and then the on click, you would set that variable to be no, right? Instead of depending on that default to be no. Okay, it's good practice to do that instead of just assuming that it's going to be no and then just don't put anything. Okay. And then here, then you would do the calculation, right? This is the calculate total button, right? So you have the button here, and this would just be how you want to calculate, the value is here, right? So you would take this value, the price per gallon, and you would say how many gallons you have, and you would multiply it. Okay. The only thing is, like, if you're a preferred customer, usually what we do in the class, you're gonna do like a deduction of 5 cents per gallon. Okay, so that's what you would take off of this. So this one, instead of regular being 250, it would be 245. So you would say 245 times, let's say I got 10 gallons, so 245 times 10 gallons. That will be your total value here. Okay, so this example kind of pulls you through like all the major points for like the JavaScript topics that we just covered for chapter 18. Okay, so let me repeat again. Radio buttons, important concept, text box here, and how many gallons do you want, right? That's your input. Important concept here, cast the number, right? So put number around this so you can make sure the computer understands that it's a number you're dealing with. Another radio button. This is a button here. So when you click on this, that's when you get the calculation going. Here is, where is that? Here, right? So when I click that button, then you want to do your calculation here, right? And then you're going to display it again in this total cost text box here, right? So total box, your total box, read only, and then the value is initialized to be blank, and then it'll get the value based on what you put in up here. Okay, so these are kind of a rehash of what you learned in chapter 18. If you feel like doing it, you can code this. If you don't, that's fine. What I asked you to do in terms of the Fahrenheit to Celsius, I think that should be fine for you to understand the concepts for these different types of objects that we're looking at. Okay. All right. Well, okay. Now we're finally on to chapter 19 here. Okay. So basically, the idea with functions is like those bits of code that you might be reusing over and over again, right? And maybe calling it from different areas. You put them into a function so that you don't have to keep on typing that code over and over again. So you only put in the code one time into your functions. And so the example they have here is how to make pizza. Okay. JavaScript is covered in the second exam, not the first exam. Okay, just remember the second exam is coming up in a couple of weeks though, and it's also covered in your upcoming assignment, not the one that you're doing right now, but the one after that. Okay, so making dough, right? You can imagine like you don't want to have to like put that formula or whatever all over the place. You just want to have like that one step. How do you make dough, right? And then you can call it from anywhere. Same thing with making sauce and making pizza. So those are the three functions. Okay. So yeah, JavaScript is a function or a block of code designed to perform a particular task. Now, you don't have to do it. That's just a convention, right? I could jam a whole bunch of stuff into that, but that's not good practice, right? Ideally, you make a function do one thing, right? So you can have these functions and then you can call the functions from the main part of your code and it'll be exactly like this, right? It'll be like make dough, make sauce, make pizza, right? It won't go into like all of the details within each function. So it makes it easy for me to look at a program from a high level and say, oh, what's this program trying to do? Maybe the program is trying to convert from like one temperature to another temperature, something like that. And you can tell all of that just by looking at this from the function, right? So if I have 3 functions at the top, the main part of the program, it tells me very quickly what I have to do. So there's a lot of reasons why you have functions. Okay, so that's one of them. The other one, like I said, is that you don't have to type that same code over and over again. And then if you make a change there, you fix it in one place. Let's say I made a mistake on how am I supposed to make dough, or I'm going to change the formula to make it, non-allergenic or something like that, right? Then you can make that change in one place, and magically everything else that knows how to make dough by calling that function will all get the same change. Okay. So yeah, so basically reuse the code like I just mentioned here. That should be fine. All right. So this is kind of basically putting in like what I was talking about before, converting the Celsius to Fahrenheit or Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? So you can have the function, right? This is how you declare it. So before you declare the variable, you said var, right? Now you're saying function. Then you have the name of the function, right? And then you have the parameters. These are the things that you pass in, right? So if I'm going to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, my input would be a temperature in Celsius. Okay. Function for a coin flip, probably I don't have to input anything. I'm just going to flip a coin. Okay. And then a function to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius. Well, I'm going to probably want to put in the temperature in Fahrenheit. Okay. You want to do a function to calculate your BMI, then you probably have your weight in pounds and height. Okay. So here's the function again. Now up here, this is what they call the function declaration. Okay. Over here, this is actually talking about what is in that function. This will lay out all of the different things that you need to do to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So here's the name, you say function. Here's the name of the function that I defined up at the previous slide. Here's my input parameter. So I'm going to pass in the Celsius, and then same JavaScript, right? Variable. And I say the result is 9 divided by 5 times the temperature plus 32. Okay. And then for me to return the value coming back out of the function, so whatever call the function will get the value, you would say return result. Okay. Now, likewise, if I want to do a Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion, I'm going to take an input of Fahrenheit, and then I'm going to have this degrees Celsius as minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. And then I'm going to return the value, see the return here, and then the value as degrees in Celsius. Okay. So this should look familiar from the chapter 18 slides, which we just did. So for those of you that are working on the extra class credit, this is basically the inverse of that, right? You're going from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay. So the parameter naming conventions, the parameters are essentially the same thing as variables, right? So of course, the conventions you're going to follow are the same thing as what we defined for the variables from last week. Okay. So they're acting just like normal variables. And so this starts from the time that you call the function, right? That's when the variable is defined, okay? And they're only used within the function, so they're local to function, okay? I'm not quite sure. Well, we still have a lot of stuff for chapter 19 to go. I'm not quite sure, but one important concept, and we have to do things like variable tracing within the exam. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it in this class or not, but there's the idea of variable scoping. So I can declare a variable up top, and that variable is accessed all over the place. Like wherever I call it within the program, it knows about it. So if I declare variable ABC, like everywhere within the code knows ABC. But if I declare a variable within the function, that variable is only known within that function. If I look anywhere else in the code, it doesn't know anything about that variable. So if I create this function here, in this case, let's say variable degrees C, right? If I have something else that's calling this function, it doesn't know what degrees C is. The only place that knows about degrees C is within this function, convert F to C. Okay, no other place knows about this variable. So that's the idea of like variable scoping. I'm not going to show it here. I'm going to actually do a printout, or I'm going to cut out a screen print of something to kind of show you some examples of variable scoping. And hopefully you can follow that. If you have any questions, then you can kind of let me know. Okay. So I have to make a note to myself to give you something about variable scoping. So the important part here is this: return the value, right? So you're returning the result here. So you remember up here with the temperature conversion, for me to get the result back, unless I'm using a global variable, which, you know, global variables are generally a bad idea. It's not good practice to use global variables, but you could pass a value back using global variables. Ideally, the way you should pass a value back is to do a return result, something like that. Okay, so this is the important here. So from a function, for me to pass a value back to the calling area or the calling program, you want to use return. It's not the only way to pass a value back. Like I said, you can use a global variable, and there's some other advanced ways to do this, but these are the general ways to do it. The advisable way for you to do it is to use the return, whatever the result is here. Okay. So making the call, right? So you're going to call the function, and all you have to do is, I define the function. So you're going to convert C to F, and you put in your argument, right? So when I define the function, whatever my input is, right? So remember I said for converting Celsius to Fahrenheit, the input is Celsius, right? So I declare whatever variable for Celsius. That is the parameter. When you call the function and you pass in like 38 in this case, that's the argument, okay? Right, and it's kind of saying that right up here, right? So the arguments, you're passing in a copy of that into the parameters, okay? So to make the function call happen, you call the function, right? You write the function name, and then you pass in the argument. So in this case, the argument is 38, okay? And then it works with those inside the function, okay? So you have cases, like I said, for the coin flip, you don't need to have like a input for that. You're just going to flip a coin, right? So you have a function and coin flip, okay? You can also have passing in like numbers, right? So in this case, I'm going to add two numbers. So you're going to pass in a 3 and a 5, right? And in this case, I'll just reiterate what I talked about before. These are the arguments, and these are the parameters, right? So now, once I pass these in within the function, I'm not going to refer to them as 3 and 5. I'm going to refer to them as num1 and num2. Okay, so again, it's argument to parameter. Okay, so this maps to this maps to this. Okay, so keep that in mind. Yeah, so parameters, like those are like I was saying, when you're doing the Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion, the parameter is the Celsius, right? What do you need to know to complete your task? You need to know the temperature in Celsius, okay? I think I have this on that other sample that I'm going to show in a second, which talks about calculating total pay, okay? So again, arguments and parameters here. So this is kind of like your flow chart type of view here of how things work within this function. So in this case, they're showing you just for demonstration a function that doesn't return a value. And so what happens here is here's your function. I declared this function to be BMI E, and then you have your weight in pounds and your height, okay? And then you have like this variable that you declare here. You're gonna calculate your BMI, and then, oops, I shouldn't have done that. And then you have your alert, and your BMI is, okay? Which is fine. You can do this. There's nothing stopping you from doing this. But again, this is not really good practice, okay? Ideally, and the reason why they do this is just to show you that you can have a function that doesn't return a value, right? You can do whatever, right? But generally, with something like this, you do want to return the value. The function should only be doing one thing, right? The function should be doing a calculation of the BMI. The fact that I get a value back, who knows that I want to display it to the screen? Maybe I want to save it onto my database. Maybe I want to do something else with it. By me creating this function that does a calculation of BMI and displaying it, you've taken away that option for me as a developer, right? So as a developer, all I want is you tell me what is the result of this calculation. The fact that I'm going to print it to the screen, that's my business, right? Or maybe I'm going to save it to the disk, or I'm going to stick it in a database. I'm going to do any number of things with this. By you kind of saying, well, you give it to me, and I'm just going to assume that you're always going to want to send an alert to the screen to show this. That's not good programming practice, right? But like I said, the reason why this was shown, just to kind of talk about the point that the function doesn't always return a value, okay? But I'm just kind of saying that remember the initial point of functions. The guidance for function is that it does one thing, right? It doesn't try to do a couple of different things exactly for this reason, right? So keep that in mind. This is just an example of something that doesn't return a value, okay? But it's not good programming practice, okay? So now here's a function that returns a value, right? So now you're doing the calculation, right? And you're doing the return from that, okay? And again, I use the alert more for debugging. I don't really use an alert for, doing anything else from a user standpoint. We would probably put it into like the actual HTML page rather than having all kinds of crazy boxes popping up on you all the time. But that's a different thing, okay? So this is a function that returns a value. Keyword is return, okay? All right. So definition versus call, okay? So, declaration is where we kind of say, okay, this is what the function logic looks like. These are the input parameters it takes. This is the logic that it does. And so that's where it's declared, right? It's analogous to you declaring your variables. Okay, so you declare a function, you just tell me what the function is all about. Okay, and you only declare it once, obviously. Okay, and then you can call the function from anywhere in the code, like I was saying before. Okay, and they're not doing anything until someone calls it, right? And maybe you get a runtime error, maybe, I don't know, right? But it just sits there, and whenever someone wants to use it, then they'll just call it. Okay. And JavaScript actually has its own internal default functions that it provides to you that are useful, right? So just like alert, right? These alert boxes will pop up when you use it. Prompt, you might use a prompt to pop up a box for you to input something. So instead of using the text boxes that I was showing before, it would just be a prompt, and you can type in a question and say, oh, enter the number of gallons, and then you have a prompt, and then you would type that in, and then you would be able to store that into a variable, let's say. Okay, so to fixed, right? We covered this, right? So when you have a number, you can do a to fixed, and you can set the number of decimal places. Okay. Something that you might see in some of the other exercises that we'll do is math. So I hope this is self-explanatory, round, right? So you can round the number, okay? This will be a common thing, math.random. So basically math.random will generate a random number between 0 and 1. And you might think, oh, well, what good does that do me? Because I might want to have a random number like from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, right? So what you do is you take that random number, like whatever, let's say it's 0.5, okay? And then you multiply it, right? So let's say I take math.random times 10, right? So all of a sudden that 0.5 will become 5, okay? So that's how you can make your range to whatever you want it to be. So you start off with the basic unit, right? In this case, math.random will come up with a random number between 0 and 1, but you want a random number between 1 and 100, let's say. Then you use a multiplier times the random to get you to whatever random number that you want, okay? Math.floor. So whatever it is, it's basically just comes back with, so let's say I have 5.5 or something like that. When I say math.floor, it basically just rounds it down to 5, okay? So here, we're gonna come up with a simple function, which I'm gonna show in a file to you in a second. Okay, so here's like a little button, here, right? Calculate, right? And here's the heading, right? Like so, and you have your script. When I put script here, that's another way for me to say that I'm doing JavaScript here. Okay, so you can put in your programming here, and here I'm doing a function called simple, and I'm just saying the answer equals to 1 plus 5 times 2, and I'm setting the text box value equals to ands. Okay. Again, not really good practice, but for the purpose of this demonstration, it's fine. Okay. Let me see if I already set this up or not. Okay. All right. All right. So we set up a function, and we just said ands equals to 1 plus input num times 2. And then the variable is returned into ands. So let me go up here. Well, I'm not calling the function, actually, I only declared the function. So in this one, I'm doing the hours worked. So where's the hours worked here? Yeah. So remember I was talking about prompt before? Okay. So here we're saying hours worked and prompt like this, hours worked. And that's what prompt does. It basically pops up an alert box with input. Okay. And notice something that I did here. So first, okay, hours worked, right? That's why that displays hours worked, and the prompt is what pops up the box. But notice that I did this 1 times here. Okay. 1 times is another way for me to tell the computer that this is a number. Okay. So just by showing that I'm taking this value and multiplying it by 1 times that, it gets to hours. You can call it a trick or whatever, or you can just say, this is a way of doing it, right? You could have just done the number like I did before and say, okay, I'm just going to be consistent no matter what. If I'm going to process the variable, I want to cast it to be a number, I'm just going to put it around the number. Okay. But people have done it this way too. Okay, so I'm just showing this as another way to do this. So it's another way to set something up to be a number. Okay, so I'm here, I put in, let's say 40 hours worked, and the pay rate here. So we input the pay per hour. So let's say $15 an hour, and then it will come back with the total pay is 600. Okay, and so it does this whole thing. If it's a calculation for over 40 hours, it's going to calculate with overtime. If it's not over 40 hours, then it just says the hours times the pay rate, right? And then it pops up an alert box for your total pay. Okay. Like so. And we also have the heads or tails thing here. Okay. So this one, we're just gonna call it flip like this with no input. Okay, and when it comes back, it will say, okay, if heads or tails equals to heads, then the text box heads.value equals, and then the number text box.value plus 1. Okay. If heads or tails equals to tails, then it's going to come back number text box tails dot value plus 1. Okay. And then we'll have an alert say the flip is heads or tails. Okay. Let's see here. Here. Okay. So here's the function. So I'm declaring the function here, and it's flip with no input. And this is the random here. Remember, a random is between 0 and 1. So I basically said if it's less than 0.5, I'm going to return heads. If it's something else, which would be basically greater than equal, greater than or equal to 0.5 up to 1, okay, it's going to return tails. Okay, so that's what these things will return here. And the other thing to notice here is you might be thinking to yourself, what is this equal or double equals to? Okay, so when I take a variable and I assign a value to it, right, I'm going to use one equal. Okay, if I want to compare something, so in this case, I'm going to compare the output from this, and does it equal to heads? It's either going to be heads or tails, right? Then I'm going to use the double equal. So I'm mentioning this because this messes people a lot, messes people up a lot. A lot of times when they want to compare something, they'll just use one equal sign. The problem with that is because it's an assignment will always be true. Okay. Which is not what the intent is here. The intent here is to check if it's equal to heads. And then sometimes you might see a triple equals. Okay. For the purpose of this class, you probably don't care about the triple equals, but the triple equals also compares the type, which you don't see, right? Let's say I have two variables and you're also trying to compare if their type is the same, right? The type being like, are they both like numbers? Are they both strings or something like that? That's a little bit more advanced than this class, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. For the purpose of this class, what you need to know is when I use one equal sign, that's an assignment. That means I have a variable and I'm taking a value, sticking into that variable. That's called assignment. When I'm doing a comparison, this is a comparison operator. I'm saying, does one thing equal to the other thing? So does the heads or tails equal to heads? Right? That's a comparison thing. It's super important that you use a double equal, right? There's so many times that people make a mistake on this. So don't make that mistake. The double equals, you always use double equals for comparisons. Okay. So make sure you remember that. Okay. Number, right? You remember a number, make sure it's something, it's just to be safe, right? Make sure that it's a number value that you're working with, then you can do a +1 to it. Okay. All right, so all this is doing is just doing a count on like the heads versus tails here. Okay, so let's see. All right. All right, so it's just a counter. Okay. And you can see this is why I don't like alert box. It's just like annoying that I have to keep on clicking this, but I should take this out. But is this just for demo, right? But this is what's happening. Okay, so I'm flipping heads or tails when I flip it, and I'm keeping a track of the count here. So number like this and like this. Okay, I did post this up onto my sample up here, chapter 19, sample HTML. So this is a good thing for you to refer to and look at for your functions, for your rounding calculation, for your comparison operator. All of these different things are in this example here. So that's in my resources. You can take a look at that. Okay. Let me see, what do I have here if I missed anything here? Okay. Yeah, so this is the same thing, right? So your parameter is in your calculation. Okay. So more stuff with parameters here. I've posted this up to the resources also, so you can take a look at this. This is what I was talking about with the return. So you return your result here. Okay. Oh, yeah, here we go. I think I must have added this note at one point before, right? So exactly what I was saying before. So this is a better solution because you're making the function do one task, right? Just to get the answer, not to display the answer, right? Because I might not want to display the answer, right? So I just want this to do one thing, which is to give me the answer, which is why you have to return ans instead of doing an alert up here. Okay, so this is an important concept, pass and return here. This is just good practice on how you do functions. All right, so this is what I just showed you before in terms of calculating the weekly pay, right? And see how we have the one times here to make sure this is cast to be a number. Yeah, button, calculate the rate. I put in the hours, I put in the pay per hour, and you get your total pay, right? Calculate pay. Yeah, don't have to worry about the code. I have the code for you. So you can take a look at it on my resources later. Ask me if there's any questions. Yeah, I did the coin toss example for you too. So you can take a look at that. Not quite like this. I did it my own way on this, but the same idea, right? So heads or tails and keeps account of it here, right? These math functions are going to be in the exam. So just make sure you understand how these things work. Okay, and you can just use my example here on these. Okay. All right, so I know I went through these functions pretty quickly and I see we're kind of out of time here. So some people had some questions about things like Venn diagrams or whatever. Just like send me an email with your questions. I'm going to be up late tonight. I'm going to try to answer any of those questions that you might have. Do the online example I asked you to do because you really want to save that for example for your exam 2 and also for your assignment. Send me the HTML if you have some questions. Ask me what you want to ask. And I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, but I'm probably going to focus higher priority on questions related to exam 1. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Some of the other stuff related to the in-class assignment, I'll try to get to it tonight. If not, maybe I'll get to it tomorrow or something. Okay. So I know I crammed a lot of material into one day or one night. But like I said, any questions, really feel free to reach out to the TAs or myself and we can provide you more examples. We can go into all of these different concepts. I'm going to do like a quick write-up or like some sample to talk about like variable scoping, because that's also an important topic that I didn't get to for this class. And if there's other things that you're confused about, make sure you let me know and I'll try to get something out there. Okay. All right. So I know we ran a very tight schedule today, very packed, but good luck for the exam on Wednesday. Do reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I want you guys to all do well on the exam. Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to say good night. And yeah, give me a shout if you have any problems. Okay. All right. Thank you.